This Day in Sports History. And welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History, a member of the Sports History Network. It's September 13th, and on this day in 1951, the Raging Bull used every tactic and just about every second to retain his title. Jake LaMotta is known for a lot of things. His 6 fights with Sugar Ray Robinson, taking a dive in his 1947 fight with Billy Fox that got him suspended from boxing, and of course being the focal point of Martin Scorsese's 1980 biopic Raging Bull. He was also known to feign injury or play possum during a fight to lure his opponent in and then deliver a fresh round of punishment. He was not a pretty fighter. There was nothing analytic about him. He stepped into the ring, and every one of them except for the one against Fox that he threw, it was a 2-man war with no survivors. He started his boxing career as a light heavyweight, but had limited success. When he trimmed down a few more pounds and dropped into the middleweight class, he rose up the ranks and eventually won the middleweight title. On this night in 1951, he was defending that belt against Frenchman Laurent Dotil. These two had met 2 years earlier, with the unranked and underdog Dotil winning a unanimous decision. That was before LaMotta had risen to number 1, so it knocked him a few rungs down the ladder. He climbed back up in the next 2 years to the top of the middleweight division. LaMotta was again the favorite in this one, but he didn't fight like it in the early rounds. Dotil kept his distance but landed punches and retreated, rinse and repeat for the first 6 rounds to take a lead on all scorecards. The referee even warned LaMotta to get moving and fight. By the 12th round, it looked like Dotil was going to beat the Bull. He landed an overhand right to LaMotta's face that stung him, and he wandered around the ring shaking his head and looking dazed, but it was just his possum tactic. When the Frenchman moved in to throw another flurry, he was met by a barrage of blows to close out the final seconds of that round. LaMotta's signs of life didn't last long, though. He took more punishment in the 13th and looked so lethargic that the crowd actually booed him. They went to the 15th round, with only one hope for LaMotta. He had to knock out Dotil or he would cough up the belt. All the Frenchman really had to do was just stay away from him, stay out of his way, dance and move. Instead, his corner told him to go fight. In the last minute of the fight, Dotil delivered another hard right, and like an artist stepping back to admire their artistic strokes, Dotil retreated to admire the damage. And then he paid for it. LaMotta even played it up a good bit, as he fell back into the ropes not once, but twice, and then he looked like he was about to go down. But it was just another possum play. With 45 seconds remaining, LaMotta unleashed a furious barrage of punches that ended with an uppercut left that floored Dotil. He couldn't get up, and the referee counted him out with just 13 seconds left. So LaMotta defended his title, but it would be the last time that he did. His 6th and final fight with Sugar Ray Robinson, that would end up being called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, was 5 months away. On this day in 1981, the Atlanta Falcons pulled off quite a fourth quarter to beat the Green Bay Packers. Maybe it was the Falcons' version of playing possum like Jake LaMotta or Muhammad Ali's rope-a-dope, but by the fourth quarter in this Week 2 game of the 81 season, the Packers were leading 17-0. A lot of it had to do with the 4 interceptions that Falcons quarterback Steve Bartkowski had thrown. It's hard to score when you keep throwing it to the other team, but this wouldn't be a Bartkowski redemption story. He did throw a touchdown pass in the fourth, but that only tied it. Instead, it was the Atlanta defense that made this massive surge in the fourth quarter possible with 2 defensive touchdowns. First, it was a pick 6 of a Lynn Dickey pass to make it 24-17 Falcons. Side note, Dickey had just as bad a day as Bartkowski, throwing 3 interceptions. And then a 57-yard scoop and score from Joel Williams to provide the final margin of victory at 31-17. The Falcons scored all 31 of their points in the final 15 minutes, tying the NFL record at that point. The Oakland Raiders had scored 31 in the fourth in a game back in 1960, and they did it again in '63. It would be 26 years before that record would be topped by the Detroit Lions, scoring 34 in the fourth quarter in a 2007 game. That sounds like a pretty good story for this dish. If you're a baseball fan, then you have undoubtedly heard the phrase tinker to Evers to chance. That famed trio played for the Chicago Cubs for 10 seasons in the early 20th century. It was on this day in 1902 that for the first time, Joe Tinker started at shortstop, Johnny Evers was moved from third to play second base, and Frank Chance played first. They would become the most famous double-play trio in the history of the game, though they didn't turn one in this game. Their first DP would not happen until the 15th, but the accolades were deserved, and it was also helped along by a little prose. So, first, the stats. In 1906, 07, 08, and 1910, the Cubs would win the National League pennant, winning the World Series in 07 and 08. Between 1906 and 1910, this trigonomic trio would turn 491 double plays, which was not the most during that span, but was good enough for third. But nobody ever really remembers who comes in third, right? They must have had some help, and they did. It seems that back in the day, and I'm talking early 1900s, no radio yet, no television obviously, that newspapermen were one of the few entertainment options available. Being wordsmiths and men of prose, sports writers would write little ditties. The one about Tinker to Evers to Chance was a little bit of that, and a lot about a demanding editor that needed some space filled. The man who made Tinker to Evers to Chance familiar is Franklin Pierce Adams, a man with 3 rather presidential names. So he worked for the New York Daily Mail, writing a weekly column. Well, he was a bit overeager to get to the Polo Grounds to watch the New York Giants play the Cubs, but his editor needed a few more column inches out of him. He just needed to fill some space. It didn't need to be good. And this is what he came up with, although before I read it, you should know that a gonfalon is a flag. Okay, so here it is. These are the saddest of possible words, Tinker to Evers to Chance. Trio of bear cubs and fleeter than birds, Tinker and Evers and Chance. Ruthlessly pricking our gonfalon bubble, making a giant hit into a double. Words that are heavy with nothing but trouble, Tinker to Evers to Chance. Adams wasn't really happy with it, but it did fill the space. His editor thought it was garbage, but it was printed in the July 12, 1910 edition of the Daily Mail. Maybe it was the Chumbawamba or the Mbop of its day, but people read it, and they liked it. And it got picked up by other newspapers, and other writers added their own stanzas to it. And the phrase, Tinker to Evers to Chance, soon became a stand-in to describe something that happened like clockwork. And in 2015, Tennessee Titan Marcus Mariota became the first quarterback to record a perfect QB rating in his first start. The Titans opened the season on the road at Tampa Bay, and this was a battle between the number 1 and number 2 picks in that year's NFL draft. Jameis Winston, top overall pick by the Bucs, versus Heisman Trophy winner and the number 2 pick in the NFL draft, Marcus Mariota. The QB battle was a close one, but the score on the scoreboard was not. Mariota completed 13 of 15 passes for 209 yards and 4 touchdowns. Winston completed 16 of 33 for 210 yards, 2 TDs, and 2 interceptions. Mariota's QB rating at the end of the day was a perfect 158.3. He joined Drew Bledsoe and Robert Griffin III as the only other rookies to do that, and the only one to do it in his first career start. Time now for today's Nothing to Do with Sports Fun Fact. Gustav Eiffel originally submitted his design for the Eiffel Tower to Barcelona, but the city turned it down for aesthetic reasons. When it was erected in Paris, it wasn't very popular there either. 300 Parisian intellectuals called it an eyesore and said it would ruin the atmosphere of the city. That's all I've got for you today. This and every episode of This Day in Sports History is researched, written, voiced, and produced by me, Steve White. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll be back tomorrow with another edition of This Day in Sports History. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.